The royal hall of the Zerithian Empire had never been so silent. Thousands of alien warriors stood in perfect lines beneath glowing crystal pillars that touched the ceiling like frozen lightning. The air shimmered with blue energy and power, and at the center of that massive hall stood one human man in heavy chains. Ethan Carter kept his back straight, even though he was surrounded by enemies. He was not a general, not a hero from legend, just a former military engineer from Earth who had survived a war that should have killed him. His face showed bruises from battle, but his eyes were calm. He refused to kneel, even when alien guards pushed his shoulders down. The crowd whispered in harsh alien tones. They had defeated Earth easily. Humans were supposed to be weak, emotional, easy to break. Yet this one refused to bow his head. High above him on a floating throne sat Emperor Kale Vorith, ruler of 1,000 systems. His armor shone like black glass, his eyes burned with cold. Intelligence, he studied Ethan as if he were an insect. You stand in the heart of my empire, human. The Emperor's voice echoed through the hall. Your species is fallen, your fleet's destroyed, your city's silent. You are nothing. The guards forced Ethan to his knees, but he looked up and said nothing, and that silence annoyed the Emperor more than any insult could have. Before the Emperor could speak again, a new sound filled the hall. The sound of soft footsteps against crystal floor. Every alien warrior lowered their head instantly. Princess Lyra Vorith entered the hall. Her silver armor reflected the light like a rising star. Her long white hair flowed behind her, and her eyes were not cold like her father's, but alive with something different, something almost human. She walked slowly toward the chain man while the entire empire watched. Whispers spread like wildfire. Why was the princess here? Why did she look at the human like that? Ethan felt her presence before she reached him. He expected hatred or curiosity, but what he saw in her eyes confused him. It was respect. She stopped in front of him, looked down at the chains, then at the guards. "Release him," she said calmly. The hall gasped. Even the Emperor leaned forward slightly. "He is a prisoner of war," one general protested. "He is an enemy." Princess Lyra did not raise her voice. "Release him," she repeated. The chains unlocked with a sharp metallic sound. Ethan slowly stood up, rubbing his wrists. Unsure if this was a trick, he looked around. Every weapon in the room was still pointed at him. This was not freedom. This was something else. The princess stepped closer, so close that only he could hear her next words clearly, but her voice carried enough of the hall to catch it. "Marry me, human," she said, her tone steady and sincere. "I want you with all my heart." The hall exploded into chaos. Alien nobles shouted in outrage. Soldiers stepped forward in confusion. Some even drew their weapons. The Emperor rose from his throne, his expression no longer calm. "Lyra," he warned, "you forget yourself." But she did not move. She kept her eyes on Ethan, as if the rest of the galaxy no longer existed. Ethan felt his heart pound in his chest. He had expected execution, torture, maybe public humiliation, but not this, never this. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Why would the most powerful princess in the galaxy choose a defeated human? He remembered the battlefield weeks ago, when alien forces surrounded his broken unit. When his own commander ordered surrender, Ethan had refused, not because he thought he could win, but because he would not leave wounded soldiers behind. He had repaired a damaged alien cannon during the fight and used it to protect his team. He fought not for victory, but for the people next to him, and somewhere in the sky above that battlefield, Princess Lyra had been watching through a command ship window. She had seen something her empire lacked, something her people had forgotten long ago: loyalty without calculation, courage without pride, love without strategy. Now she stood before him, risking everything for that belief. The Emperor's voice thundered again. "If you marry this human, you give up your claim to the throne." Silence fell instantly. This was no small threat. This meant exile, loss of power, loss of destiny. Every alien, I turned toward her, waiting for fear to appear on her face, but instead she lifted her chin slightly. "Then I choose him," she said, calm and unshaken. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. This was madness. This was impossible. And yet there was no doubt in her eyes, only determination. Soldiers waited for the Emperor's command. Generals whispered about rebellion. Nobles looked ready to riot. The strongest empire in the galaxy trembled not because of war, but because of one decision, one human, one princess. And in that moment, Ethan understood something strange. This was not about romance, this was about the future of two species, about strength beyond weapons, about something that scared the Empire more than any fleet, the human heart. And as the hall remained frozen in shock, Princess Lyra extended her hand toward him, not as a ruler, but as an equal, and somewhere far away, on a broken earth still healing from invasion, destiny quietly changed direction. If you want to see what happens next, and how this impossible proposal shakes the galaxy, gently make sure to subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the next part of this story, because this was only the beginning of a war that would decide the future of humans and aliens alike. Weeks before the impossible proposal shook the royal hall, before the princess spoke words that echoed across the empire, Ethan Carter was just another human standing in the ruins of a dying city on Earth. The sky above him burned orange from falling ships. Alien cruisers hovered like silent gods in the clouds, and human forces were already collapsing under pressure they could not match. The Zerithian Empire did not invade with anger or hatred. They invaded with cold efficiency. They studied Earth for years, learned human weaknesses, mapped every defense system, and when they arrived, they struck fast and without mercy. Ethan was not a frontline soldier. He was a combat engineer assigned to repair broken systems and keep weapons running. He was trained to fix things, not to fight legends, but war does not care about job titles. When the alien strike destroyed his base's outer shield grid, chaos spread instantly. Commanders shouted retreat orders. Soldiers panicked. Some dropped their weapons and ran. The sky cracked open as enemy drop ships landed around them like metallic predators. Ethan felt fear like everyone else, but he also felt something stronger. He saw two injured soldiers trapped under fallen steel beams near a burning transport vehicle, and while others focused on escaping, he ran toward the fire, not away from it. Explosions shook the ground. Alien troops advanced in perfect formation, tall armored figures with glowing blades and rifles that hummed with advanced energy. They expected surrender. They were used to it. Most species broke quickly once they saw the Empire's power, but humans were different in a way the Empire had not fully calculated. Humans were unpredictable, emotional, irrational, and sometimes that made them dangerous. Ethan reached the trapped soldiers and tried to lift the beam. It was too heavy. Smoke filled his lungs. One of the injured men grabbed his arm and told him to leave, told him it was over, told him humans had lost, but Ethan shook his head and looked around desperately for another solution. That was when he noticed something strange. A fallen alien turret near the battlefield, damaged but not destroyed. Sparks flickered from its core. It was far more advanced than any human weapon, and it should have been impossible for him to use it. But Ethan had spent years studying alien tech after first contact. He understood patterns, circuits, energy flow. He ran toward the turret under enemy fire, bullets of light burning the ground near his feet. Alien soldiers shouted in surprise as the human knelt beside their weapon instead of hiding from it. Ethan opened the side panel with shaking hands. Wires and glowing nodes stared back at him like a puzzle meant to kill him. He did not have time to fully understand it, so he trusted instinct. He rerouted power manually, bypassed damaged sections, and forced the system to reboot. The turret came alive with a deep hum. Aliens paused in confusion. One of them stepped forward to stop him, but before the warrior could react, the turret fired. Not randomly, not wildly, but precisely. Ethan turned the alien weapon against its own forces, creating a wall of defense long enough for surviving humans to regroup and escape. He did not fight for glory. He did not shout heroic words. He simply refused to let the people beside him die. High above the battlefield inside a command vessel, Princess Lyra watched through tactical screens. At first she saw only another primitive species resisting the inevitable. But then her focus locked onto a single human moving with reckless courage. She observed his actions carefully. He could have fled. He could have surrendered like many others. But he chose to protect the weak instead. Even when defeat was certain, She watched him carry the injured soldiers to safety after the turret ran out of power. Watched him stay behind to draw enemy fire so others could escape. Something about that choice disturbed her. Not because it was foolish, but because it was powerful in a way her empire no longer understood. The Zerithians valued strength, logic, survival of the most efficient. But this human acted on something deeper, something emotional yet unbreakable. Her advisors dismissed him as a stubborn animal. Yet she kept watching. When alien ground forces finally surrounded Ethan, he stood exhausted and injured, his weapon empty, his body barely able to remain upright. A Zerithian commander stepped forward and demanded that he kneel, surrender, and beg for mercy. That was standard procedure. Conquered beings knelt. It symbolized acceptance of the Empire's superiority. But Ethan did not kneel, even when a blade touched his throat. Even when energy cuffs were locked around his wrists, he remained standing, breathing heavily, but unbowed. "Kneel," the commander repeated, and Ethan simply replied, "No." Not with anger, not with arrogance, just simple refusal. The commander prepared to strike him down for disrespect. But at that exact moment, Princess Lyra's voice came through the battlefield comm channel ordering the human captured alive, not executed. The commander hesitated, confused, but obeyed. As Ethan was taken away in chains, he did not look defeated. He looked determined. And that image stayed in Lyra's mind long after the battlefield fell silent. She had seen many warriors in her life. Alien champions bred for combat. Generals who conquered worlds. But she had never seen someone so physically weak compared to her species, stand so firm in spirit. Something about humans intrigued her more than she wanted to admit. Back in the present inside the royal capital, many nobles believed Ethan was alive only for interrogation or study. They never imagined the princess had her own reason. She began secretly requesting reports about human culture, history, psychology. She learned about their wars, their art, their love stories, their mistakes. She discovered that humans fought hardest when protecting others, that they evolved through struggle rather than comfort. And slowly a dangerous idea formed in her mind. Maybe the Empire was strong but stagnant. Maybe humans were weak but growing. And maybe strength without heart was a path towards slow extinction. While Ethan sat alone in a containment chamber weeks later, unaware that a princess was studying his species, he refused every attempt to force submission. He answered questions calmly, refused to beg, refused to kneel even inside a cell designed to break prisoners mentally. Guards reported that the human showed no signs of hatred either, only quiet resilience. And that confused them even more. They expected anger or despair, not steady determination. Rumors about him began spreading among soldiers. Some called him foolish, others called him brave, and Princess Lyra made her decision in silence. The Empire needed something it had forgotten, and the human who would not kneel might be the key. But she knew choosing him would ignite a storm that could tear her world apart. And still she moved forward, because for the first time in her life, logic alone did not guide her heart, and that frightened her more than any war ever could. The royal court of the Zerithian Empire had survived wars, rebellions, and the collapse of entire star systems, but had never faced a crisis like this. The air inside the council chamber felt heavier than armor. Nobles filled the circular hall in rising rows of silver platforms, their glowing robes shifting colors with their emotions, anger flashing red, fear pulsing violet, disbelief flickering like broken light. At the center stood Princess Lyra beside the human they all despised, Ethan. Carter remained calm, though every eye in the room judged him as unworthy, primitive, inferior. The Emperor sat high above them in shadow, silent for now, allowing the storm below to grow. Accusations filled the chamber. Humans are unstable, one noble shouted. They fight with emotion, not reason, another added. They destroy their own planet and call it progress. Others warned that allowing a human into the royal bloodline would poison centuries of genetic perfection. Through it all, Lyra stood unmoving, her posture steady, her expression controlled. But inside her mind, a different battle was unfolding, because the truth she carried was more dangerous than any insult spoken in that room. She had not chosen Ethan only because of his courage. She had chosen him because her empire was slowly dying, though none of them wished to admit it. The Zerithians were powerful beyond measure, their technology unmatched, their fleets unstoppable. But for generations their evolution had stopped. Their scientists hid the reports, their physicians disguised the numbers, birth rates were falling, emotional capacity declining. Their species had removed too much feeling from their society in the name of efficiency. They eliminated chaos, removed risk, silenced passion, and in doing so they had weakened something essential. Their warriors were strong but lacked adaptability. Their leaders were logical but lacked empathy. Their culture was stable but hollow. Lyra had spent years studying classified archives, reading hidden data about their biological stagnation, and she discovered a terrifying projection. Within 5 generations, the Empire would begin irreversible decline, not from invasion, but from within. She realized that their greatest strength had become their quiet weakness. When she first observed humans, she saw chaos and destruction, but she also saw a rapid growth, emotional intensity, creativity born from struggle. Humans fought among themselves, made mistakes, learned quickly, adapted fast. They evolved under pressure instead of avoiding it. And something in their unpredictable nature sparked an idea inside her mind that she could not ignore. She began secretly funding research comparing human neural patterns with Zerithian cognition. The results shocked her. Humans formed deeper emotional bonds. Their brains rewired faster under stress. Their resilience increased when protecting loved ones, while her own species had trained those instincts away in pursuit of order. She kept this research hidden because if the council discovered it, they would accuse her of treason. They believed purity of their species was sacred, yet purity was slowly suffocating them. When she watched Ethan on the battlefield refusing to abandon his injured comrades, she saw proof of what the data suggested. Humans were not weaker. They were incomplete in some ways, but dangerously powerful in others. And the Empire needed that missing fire. Now standing before the council, she decided to reveal part of the truth. "You believe I act out of emotion," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the noise. "But I act out of survival." The chamber quieted slightly, curiosity interrupting outrage. "Our empire is not as strong as you think," she continued. "Our numbers fall each cycle. Our adaptability declines. Our young show less emotional range than the last generation." Gasps echoed across the platforms. Some called her words lies. Others demanded proof. But the Emperor remained silent, and that silence was louder than any protest. Lyra turned toward the nobles and projected classified data into the air, holographic graphs revealing downward curves that none of them could deny. Fear replaced anger in many faces, because numbers could not be argued away. "We removed too much from ourselves," Lyra said softly. "We removed passion, unpredictability, instinct. We became perfect machines, and machines do not evolve." She then turned slightly toward Ethan, who stood still, unsure if he was witness or weapon in this moment. "Humans are flawed," she admitted. "They are impulsive, emotional, sometimes reckless, but they grow under pressure. They love fiercely. They adapt faster than any species we have studied." Murmurs spread again, this time not only with anger, but with uncertainty. The idea that a so-called primitive species could hold something valuable was difficult to accept. One powerful noble stepped forward and accused her openly. "You would dilute our bloodline with chaos," he said sharply. "You would risk our supremacy for an experiment." Lyra's eyes hardened slightly. "No," she replied. "I would strengthen it." The Emperor finally spoke then, his deep voice silencing every whisper. "You claim this human is the key to our survival," he said slowly. "Then prove it." Tension snapped like a stretched wire. Lyra understood what that meant. The court demanded demonstration, not theory, and before she could respond, a new voice cut through the chamber. Prince Keller, heir of a rival noble house and one of the Empire's most feared warriors, stepped into the center circle, his armor dark red, his expression cold with pride. He stared at Ethan with open contempt. "If this human represents the future," Keller said, "let him survive our present." The challenge was clear. A combat trial, public, brutal, designed to expose weakness. The crowd approved instantly. Violence was easier to understand than data. Lyra felt a wave of dread but did not show it, because she knew this was inevitable. Ethan met Kaler's gaze without lowering his own, not in arrogance, but in quiet refusal to submit. The Emperor nodded once, sealing the decision. The trial would take place at dawn in the arena of judgment, and if Ethan failed, not only would he die, but Lyra's vision would die with him. As the council began to disperse, whispers filled the chamber again, some predicting the human's quick death, others fearing what it would mean if he survived. And Lyra stood still watching Ethan being escorted away. Doubt flickered in her heart for the first time since her decision, because belief was easy in theory, but survival in the arena required more than belief. It required proof written in blood, and somewhere deep within the palace walls forces already moved in shadow, because not everyone intended to let the trial decide the outcome fairly. And as night fell over the capital world, the fate of two species balanced on the edge of a blade, waiting for morning. The arena of judgment was older than the Empire's current dynasty, carved into black crystal stone that shimmered under twin suns, its walls rising high into the sky like a silent warning. Thousands of Zerithians filled the massive structure, their voices blending into a deep vibrating hum that shook the air. Today was not simply a combat trial. Today was a test of pride, evolution, and the future of the Empire itself. At the center of the arena stood Ethan Carter wearing simple combat armor. Provided by the guards, no advanced weapons, no enhancements, no hidden technology. Across from him the gates opened slowly, and Prince Kaler stepped out like a living weapon. Taller, broader, his armor fused directly into his skin through genetic engineering. Glowing lines pulsed along his body, proof of superior design. The crowd roared in approval, because Kaler was everything they believed strength should be: powerful, controlled, flawless. Ethan looked small in comparison, human muscles, against alien perfection. But his eyes did not show fear, only focus. High above them in a private balcony, Princess Lyra stood beside the Emperor, her hands clasped tightly, though her face remained calm. She knew this would not be a fair fight. Kaler had trained for decades in enhanced gravity chambers, his reflexes amplified beyond natural limits, while Ethan had only weeks of recovery after brutal war. A deep horn echoed across the arena, signaling the beginning. Kaler moved first, so fast that many spectators barely saw him move. He struck with a force that cracked the stone floor where Ethan had been standing seconds before. Dust exploded into the air. Ethan rolled aside just in time, his heart pounding. He understood immediately that direct confrontation meant death, so he did not fight the way Kaler expected. Instead of attacking back, he retreated strategically, studying his opponent's rhythm, watching how the prince shifted weight before each strike, noticing small pauses. In the glowing lines of his armor, when he overextended power, Kaler grew irritated quickly. He was used to opponents meeting him head-on, proving their honor through strength. But this human refused to follow the script. The prince lunged again, energy blades slicing through the air with lethal precision. Ethan grabbed a broken fragment of arena stone and hurled it toward the prince's helmet, not to injure, but to distract. A small action, but enough to shift timing. Kaler's blade missed by inches, scraping Ethan's shoulder instead of cutting through his chest. Blood stained his armor, yet he stayed on his feet. The crowd began murmuring, confusion replacing confidence. Humans were supposed to panic under pressure, yet this one adapted with every movement. Lyra watched closely. She recognized the same pattern she saw on the battlefield. Ethan did not fight with pride. He fought with survival instinct sharpened by care for others. Kaler's attacks became more aggressive, each strike stronger, faster, shaking the arena floor, but aggression created openings. Ethan waited patiently, allowing the prince to exhaust bursts of enhanced power, calculating silently like an engineer solving a problem. Then he noticed something crucial. Each time Kaler unleashed maximum force, the glowing lines across his armor dimmed briefly afterward. A cooling phase, a weakness hidden behind strength. The next attack came like a falling star. Ethan barely avoided it, feeling heat burn his side. And as Kaler's armor dimmed for a split second, Ethan moved forward instead of backward. He did not try to overpower the prince. He aimed at the armor's joint where light faded, striking with a piece of broken metal he had concealed from the arena floor. Sparks flew. Kaler staggered not from damage, but from surprise. The human had observed and exploited a flaw no one else dared to search for. Anger flashed across the prince's face. Pride wounded more deeply than armor. He roared and activated. Full combat mode. Energy radiating around him in a dangerous halo. The Emperor leaned forward slightly. This escalation bordered on excessive force, but he did not intervene. He wanted to see how far the human could go. Ethan realized this next strike could end him. So he did something unexpected. He dropped his weapon and ran directly toward the prince instead of away. The crowd gasped, assuming desperation. But Ethan's mind was clear. At close range, Kaler's wide, powerful strikes were harder to control. As the prince swung downward, Ethan stepped inside the arc of the blade, grabbing the prince's arm and using momentum to redirect force into the ground. The impact destabilized both of them. They crashed onto the stone floor, grappling in raw physical struggle, strength against endurance. Kaler was stronger, pushing Ethan back inch by inch, yet the human refused to yield. Blood from his earlier wound dripped onto the arena floor. His vision blurred slightly, but he focused on one thought: do not kneel. He twisted his body sharply, using leverage rather than muscle, forcing Kaler's arm into the damaged joint area again, pressing with everything he had left. A loud crack echoed as the prince's armor short-circuited. Energy flickered violently, and for the first time Kaler hesitated. Just 1 second, but enough. Ethan rolled away and kicked the prince's leg precisely at the weakened joint. Kaler collapsed to one knee, not fully defeated, but clearly compromised. Silence fell across the arena. Thousands of spectators frozen in disbelief. A human had forced the Empire's strongest prince to kneel, not through superior strength, but through intelligence and relentless adaptation. Kaler tried to rise again, but his armor systems failed completely. Sparks dancing across his body. Ethan stood above him, breathing heavily, exhausted, wounded, yet unbroken. The Emperor slowly rose from his throne, the arena waiting for his verdict, tension thick enough to suffocate. If Kaler chose to continue without armor, he might still overpower the human. But pride battled logic inside him. Finally, he lowered his head slightly in acknowledgement of defeat. The crowd erupted not in cheers, but in stunned silence followed by scattered whispers. Something fundamental had shifted. Lyra felt a surge of relief, and something deeper. Hope, because the trial had proven more than physical survival. It proved her belief was not foolish. Yet as Ethan helped Kaler stand instead of striking him while vulnerable, another wave of murmurs spread through the arena. Mercy was not expected here, and in that simple act, Ethan displayed a strength the Empire rarely valued. But while the public trial ended with shock, hidden eyes watched from shadowed corridors, nobles who feared change more than defeat, and as Ethan was escorted from the arena not as a prisoner, but as a contender. Secret plans accelerated quietly, because proving worth in combat was only the beginning. Surviving what came next would require more than strength. And somewhere deep within the palace walls, betrayal was already taking shape, waiting for night to fall. The victory in the arena did not bring peace to the palace. It brought silence, and that silence felt more dangerous than open anger. Corridors once filled with confident footsteps now carried whispers that stopped when Ethan passed. Servants avoided eye contact. Guards shifted uneasily, as if unsure whether to protect him or watch him. The Empire had witnessed a human force Prince Kaler to kneel, and pride wounded at that level does not fade quietly. It searches for revenge. That evening, a celebration feast was announced by order of the Emperor, a public gesture meant to show stability after the trial. Golden lights filled the grand banquet hall, long tables curved beneath floating crystal chandeliers. Alien nobles gathered in formal attire, masks of politeness covering resentment. Ethan stood beside Princess Lyra, wearing ceremonial clothing that felt unfamiliar on his human frame. He was aware that every smile directed at him carried hidden meaning. Lyra sensed it too, though. Her face remained calm and composed. She leaned slightly closer and spoke softly, telling him to remain alert, because power challenged always strikes back. Music echoed through the hall, elegant and cold, and for a brief moment it almost felt like peace, until Ethan noticed something wrong. One of the guards near the main entrance wore Imperial colors, but moved differently, too rigid, too controlled. His steps slightly delayed, as if following instructions rather than instinct. Ethan's engineer mind always looked for patterns, and this pattern did not match. He glanced toward Lyra, but before he could speak the lights flickered sharply. A minor fluctuation that most nobles ignored, but Ethan saw it as confirmation. The false guard moved toward the princess with unnatural speed, drawing a concealed plasma blade from beneath ceremonial fabric. Everything happened in a heartbeat. The music stopped abruptly, nobles gasped, and Ethan reacted without thinking. He stepped directly between the blade and Lyra, the plasma edge slicing across his side instead of her chest. Pain exploded through his body like fire. Yet he did not fall immediately. He grabbed the attacker's arm and twisted hard, forcing the weapon away. Real guards finally reacted, surrounding the assassin in seconds. But the damage was done. Blood spread across Ethan's ceremonial clothing, staining the polished floor beneath him. Lyra caught him as he collapsed, her calm mask finally cracking, fear visible in her eyes. For the first time since she announced her choice, the hall descended into chaos. Nobles shouting accusations, some claiming it was a human plot to gain sympathy, others blaming rival houses. The Emperor's voice thundered across the chamber, ordering lockdown protocols. Doors sealed, shields activated. But betrayal had already entered the palace walls, as medical teams rushed Ethan away. Lyra walked beside him, refusing to leave his side, despite advisors urging her to remain safe. Inside the medical wing, advanced alien technology sealed his wound. The plasma cut was deep, but not fatal thanks to his quick movement. Still, the pain kept him conscious enough to understand what had happened. He saved her without hesitation, not because she was royalty, but because he would never stand still while someone tried to harm another person in front of him. That simple human instinct again disrupted the logic of the Empire. Outside, the medical chamber investigations began quickly. Security footage revealed the assassin was not an official guard, but a member of a noble house loyal to Prince Kaler's faction. Yet Kaler himself denied involvement, claiming the attack dishonored him. Tension between houses rose instantly, suspicion spreading like poison. Some nobles saw opportunity in chaos. If the princess died, the succession would shift. If the human died, her position would weaken. Either outcome suited those who feared change. Lyra stood in the observation room, watching Ethan through the transparent barrier, guilt pressing against her composure. She had drawn him into a storm far larger than either of them alone. Yet when he finally opened his eyes and saw her standing there, he gave a faint, tired smile, as if saving her had been the most natural choice in the world. That smile struck her harder than any accusation from the council, because it confirmed her deepest fear. This was no longer political strategy. This was personal, while the palace struggled with investigation. Something more dangerous unfolded quietly. Encrypted messages moved between rival houses, alliances shifting rapidly. Whispers of civil unrest reached military commanders stationed across nearby systems. Some supported Lyra's vision of change. Others believed the Empire must remain pure at any cost. And within hours, small riots erupted in lower districts of the capital. Citizens divided over the idea of a human consort. The Emperor convened an emergency council behind closed doors, his expression unreadable. He had ruled with absolute authority for decades. But this crisis threatened stability at its core. He questioned whether his daughter's choice was bravery or recklessness. Yet the data she revealed about species decline could not be ignored. As night deepened across the capital world, alarms suddenly echoed from the outer defense grid. Unauthorized ships attempting to breach planetary airspace. Not foreign enemies, but vessels registered to internal noble factions. What began as a hidden assassination attempt now grew into open rebellion. Ethan, still recovering but refusing sedation, overheard reports from medical staff. He understood immediately. This was no longer about marriage. This was about power structures breaking under pressure. He slowly stood despite protests from doctors, pain radiating through his body. Because he knew something about humans that the Empire was only beginning to understand. Conflict does not scare them into surrender. It sharpens them. Lyra entered the room again, exhausted but determined. And when their eyes met, there was no need for explanation. They both knew what was coming next would not be solved by royal decree alone. Outside the palace windows, flashes of distant explosions lit the night sky. The empire that conquered galaxies now trembled from within, divided by fear of evolution. And as loyalist forces mobilized to defend the capital, while rebel fleets positioned for confrontation. 1. Truth became clear. The assassination attempt was only the first strike in a civil war that could either destroy the Zerithian Empire forever or transform it into something entirely new. And at the center of that storm stood a wounded human who refused to kneel and a princess who refused to turn back, knowing that love, courage, and change always come at a cost, and the price was about to be paid in full. The first explosion in orbit did not come from rebel ships. It came from something far beyond the outer defense grid, something no Zerithian sensor had predicted. High above the capital world, a new fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a flash of blue-white distortion. Dozens of human vessels formed a tight defensive formation, smaller and less advanced than Imperial warships, but moving with sharp coordination. Their hulls scarred from previous battles, yet steady, inside the palace. Command center alarms echoed as officers scrambled to identify the incoming force. Confusion spread quickly when translation systems confirmed the fleet's origin. Earth. Humanity had crossed deep space not for revenge, not for conquest, but for one man, Ethan Carter. Word of his survival and the brewing civil unrest had reached Earth through fragmented signals intercepted during the war. Human leaders debated the risk for days. They knew challenging the Zerithian Empire directly could mean annihilation. But they also knew something else. Humans do not abandon their own, especially not someone who stood against impossible odds. When the rebel faction saw the human fleet appear, they miscalculated instantly. Assuming it was a sign of alliance with Lyra, they accelerated their assault to crush the capital before humans could interfere. Space around the planet turned into chaos. Rebel cruisers firing at loyalist defense platforms while human ships maneuvered carefully between them. Not firing immediately, but positioning themselves like shields. Inside one of the lead human destroyers, Captain Mira Solano stood at the command deck watching the massive alien ships exchange devastating plasma fire. Her voice calm despite the scale of destruction. She ordered all channels opened, broadcasting a single message across every frequency. This is the United Earth Fleet. We are here for one purpose only. Protect our citizen. We do not seek war. The message echoed across orbit. Some Zerithian commanders laughed at the audacity. Others hesitated, because even in smaller numbers the humans' arrival signaled something dangerous, loyalty strong enough to cross the galaxy. In the palace, Ethan watched orbital combat unfold through a holographic projection, pain still sharp in his side, but ignored. When he saw human ships taking fire to block rebel missiles from striking civilian districts, his chest tightened. They came for him, risking everything. Lyra stood beside him, realizing fully what this meant. Humans were not simply emotional. They were bound by connection stronger than fear. Outside, a rebel flagship targeted the human destroyer, broadcasting messages, assuming eliminating it would collapse morale. Energy cannons charged bright red, and for a moment it seemed the human ship would be torn apart, but instead of retreating, it advanced directly into the firing arc, releasing a swarm of smaller defense drones that intercepted the blast at the last second. The explosion lit the void like a newborn star. The crowd in the palace command center fell silent. The Emperor watched carefully, calculating this was not primitive behavior. This was disciplined sacrifice. On the battlefield, human ships did not outgun the Empire. They outmaneuvered it, using unpredictable flight paths, exploiting blind angles, coordinating through rapid communication networks that adapted in real time. Zerithian loyalist forces began adjusting tactics after observing human movements, and slowly a fragile cooperation formed in orbit without official alliance. Rebel ships found themselves pressured from two directions, confusion spreading among their ranks. But the real danger was escalation. One wrong strike against the capital could ignite full-scale interspecies war. Ethan understood that better than anyone. If humans and Zerithians turned against each other now, it would confirm every fear of those who opposed his presence. He turned to Lyra and asked for access to the primary broadcast array. Advisors protested immediately. A wounded human addressing fleets in active combat was madness. But Lyra overruled them without hesitation. Moments later, Ethan's face appeared on every major display across orbit, both human and alien, the battle noise still raging behind him, his voice steady though not loud. "This fight is not why we are here," he began, choosing simple, clear words. "Humans came because we protect our own, but we are not your enemy." He looked directly into the transmission camera, knowing rebel commanders watched as well. "If you fear change, fight me, not your people." His message spread quickly. Rebel leaders dismissed it as weakness at first, but uncertainty grew among their crews. Many had not signed up for civil war against their own empire, especially not with human fleets now demonstrating unexpected coordination. The Emperor studied Ethan's speech carefully, seeing something he had not seen in decades: influence without authority, respect earned, not commanded. In orbit, the momentum shifted gradually. Loyalist forces regained defensive control, while human ships focused on shielding civilian zones. Rebel commanders faced a difficult truth: continued aggression would isolate them further and possibly unite humans and loyalists permanently. Some withdrew cautiously. Others attempted final desperate strikes, but were intercepted by combined defense lines. After hours of intense combat, the rebellion's outer fleet began retreating toward distant systems. Not destroyed but weakened, the capital world stabilized slowly, debris drifting across orbit like silent evidence of how close they came to disaster. Inside the palace, the atmosphere changed again. Not celebration, but realization. Humans had demonstrated strength not in conquest, but in loyalty and restraint. Lyra looked at Ethan with renewed conviction, her belief no longer theoretical. While the Emperor approached them quietly, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. He had witnessed empires rise and fall, and he recognized a turning point when he saw one. Below them, the city lights flickered back to steady glow as defense systems powered down. Yet the crisis was far from over. Rebels still held territory across outer systems. Alliances were fragile, and trust between species hung by a thread. But something irreversible had begun. Humans had stepped into the galaxy not as prey, not as conquerors, but as partners willing to stand beside those they cared for. And in that act, they forced the Empire to confront a truth it could no longer ignore. Strength alone maintains power, but connection builds future. And as Ethan leaned slightly against the command console, exhausted but standing, he understood that the hardest battles were not fought with weapons. They were fought with choices. And the next choice would decide whether this fragile cooperation became lasting alliance or temporary pause before greater war. The days after the orbital battle felt strangely quiet, but it was not the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of decision. Across the capital world, citizens watched endless replays of the human fleet shielding their cities, of Ethan's broadcast echoing across the stars, of rebel ships turning away instead of destroying their own home. The Empire had not collapsed, but it had changed, and everyone felt it. Inside the Imperial throne chamber, the final council gathered, not in anger this time, but in tension-filled expectation. Rebel leaders who surrendered were brought under guard. Loyalist generals stood in rigid formation. Nobles whispered less and listened more. At the center of the chamber, Princess Lyra stood beside Ethan. No chains, no ceremonial masks, just quiet strength. The Emperor entered slowly, wearing no battle armor, only the simple black robes of leadership, a sign that what was about to happen would not be solved by weapons. He looked at the council, then at the massive holographic projection displaying current Empire data. damaged fleets, unstable outer systems, rising support among citizens for reform. And for the first time in many cycles, he spoke not as an unquestioned ruler, but as a father and guardian of a future he could not fully control. Our strength preserved us, he said, his voice steady. But it also blinded us. Murmurs spread carefully through the chamber. He turned toward Lyra. You chose change when we chose comfort, he admitted. And those words carried more weight than any decree. Then he did something no emperor had done in centuries. He stepped down from the throne platform and removed the symbol of absolute command from his chest, placing it in Lyra's hands. Gasps echoed around the hall, because abdication was unthinkable in Zerithian tradition. Yet the emperor continued. The empire must evolve, or it will fade. His eyes moved briefly toward Ethan, not with hatred, not even with suspicion, but with measured respect. An evolution requires risk. Lyra did not hesitate. She accepted the symbol not as triumph, but as responsibility. And when she turned to face the council, her voice carried the calm strength that once belonged to her father. We will not erase our history, she declared, but we will not fear our future. She announced the formation of a new interspecies alliance, not conquest, not assimilation, but partnership. The Human Zerithian Federation, a shared council of equal representation, research, exchange, cultural integration, and defensive cooperation. Many nobles resisted at first, but public support across the capital and loyalist systems surged rapidly. The people had witnessed human loyalty. They had felt the impact of near civil collapse, and they understood stagnation was a greater threat than change. Prince Kaler, his armor repaired but pride reshaped, stepped forward unexpectedly and knelt not in defeat but in acceptance, pledging loyalty to the new empress and acknowledging Ethan's strength openly. That act shattered remaining resistance among warrior factions, because if the empire's greatest fighter could adapt, others could follow. Outside the palace, human and Zerithian representatives began joint meetings, scientists exchanging data, engineers studying combined technologies, cultural ambassadors learning each other's languages. And for the first time since first contact, there was hope without domination. Yet the most important moment did not happen in the council chamber. It happened quietly later that evening on a balcony overlooking the glowing capital city. Lyra stood beside Ethan beneath the twin moons. No guards, no advisors, just distant city lights stretching like stars across the surface. The weight of empire resting on her shoulders. She looked at him not as ruler to subject, not as experiment to solution, but simply as a woman who had taken a leap of faith. I asked you once in a hall filled with anger, she said softly. Now I ask you. In peace. She turned fully toward him, her silver eyes reflecting the moons above. Will you marry me, human? Ethan smiled faintly, still carrying scars from battles both physical and political. He thought of Earth, of the soldiers he saved, of the fleet that crossed the galaxy for him, of the empire that nearly tore itself apart over one decision. And he understood that this was bigger than love. But love was still at its center. Yes, he answered simply, no speech, no grand gesture, just truth. And in that simple word, centuries of tradition shifted quietly. In the months that followed, the Federation began rebuilding damaged systems together. Human engineers adapted alien shield technology. Zerithian scientists studied human neural flexibility. Joint academies trained future leaders in both logic and empathy. Outer rebel systems were reintegrated not through punishment, but negotiation. And slowly the idea of purity gave way to the idea of strength through unity, historians would later mark this era as the beginning of a new empire, not defined by dominance, but by connection, not ruled by fear of weakness, but guided by acceptance of difference. And far beyond the capital world, distant civilizations watching from hidden star systems recalculated their assumptions about both species, because something unprecedented had occurred. A powerful empire chose evolution instead of extinction. And a small human from a broken battlefield became the bridge between galaxies, proving that sometimes the strongest force in the universe is not superior firepower or ancient bloodlines, but the courage to stand unbroken, the willingness to protect others, and the heart brave enough to choose love in the middle of war, and under the twin moons of a once divided world. A new future quietly began. Not perfect, not without challenges, but alive, evolving, and stronger than either species could have been alone.